my name is Susie, and today I thought I would share with you an idea on how to make a room look bigger. And I did that through actually creating a much taller doorway, and you can also do this to windows. And the way that you can do it is by actually adding a transom at the top of the doorway or the top of the window. And what I'm going to show you today is how I created a transom and transformed my entryway from a very closed-in small space to something that looks quite large and has some presence. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to measure the inside of your door. Sure that you are measuring inside your door opening, the width. So you want to make sure that you are measuring the inseam of the door. Now these measurements are important because it's going to determine what the exterior frame is going to measure, and that's what we're going to be doing. We're basically going to be creating a new frame for your doorway or your window, and we're going to extend that from having the top baseboard or crown molding. We're going to extend that crown molding and we're going to lift it by about a foot. And in its place, we're going to add mirrors to create the illusion of small panes of glass. And by doing this, it really does make the doorway or the window look much taller, which in turn makes the room look much bigger. So once you determine the inside measurement of your doorway, then you're going to have to decide on your trim and your top crown molding to finish off your doorway or your window. What I did is I bought a pre-made kit which had the two side panels and the top panel, I shouldn't call them panels, the two side boards and the top board for the doorway, and it came as a package. So the side boards were 8 feet tall, and the crown board or the horizontal board at the top of the doorway was 42 inches. So of course I had to adjust that to fit into my doorway. So the first thing I did was I carefully removed the old trim on the door, and taking into account the width of that trim. The width of your trim is going to be really important because it's going to determine whether or not you have to replace your baseboard. So in most instances, people have their trim that runs right down to the floor and the baseboard that butts up against the trim. So if you remove your old trim and were to replace it with a narrower one, there would be a gap and you would have to add on to the baseboard. And that's very hard to do if you're talking about an existing home that's already finished. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that your new trim is of equal or greater width than the original one. That way you can always cut into the baseboard a little bit to fit in your new trim, but it's very difficult to add on to it. Count the width of the old and the new door trim, because if you have existing baseboard, your door trim is going all the way to the floor. So you have to account for this width. So you want your new door frame to be of equal size or wider than the original trim, so that you're not missing a piece of baseboard that maybe you cannot find. So next what I did is I took the two side pieces and placed them on either side of my doorway, making sure that they were flush with the opening of the door. And I just tacked them on with a small finishing nail and held them in place while I measured the inside measurement of the inside of the door. set. And with that measurement, I was able to cut a small piece of wood that I was going to add to trim off that top of the door, but also connect the two sideboards. And my piece of wood that I purchased was 1.5 inches width. Now the thickness of that little piece of wood has to be the same thickness as your side pieces of paneling, because you want it to be flush. This cross beam here that we've added is 1.5 inches, and the depth is important. This is 1/2 inch, but our door trim is also 1/2 inch thick. So you get a continuous run, and this part is flat while the transom is inset into the frame. Side, I cut it to size, and I set my piece of wood off to the side. Now, the next thing that I wanted to do was I wanted to cut my piece of hardy board, and that is going to fit inside this frame that I'm creating above the doorway. Inches. Now this board I just tacked on to the top of the doorway because I wanted to use it as a way to measure how far up the doorway was going to go. And that measurement is really going to be determined by personal taste, but also the size of the glass tiles that you used. So you need to find mirrored tiles in order to give that reflection to look like it is a window. And I was able to find some beveled mirror tiles, which were actually used for a backsplash, and they were vintage. They look like mercury glass, and I got those at Home Depot, and they were 3 inches by 7 inches in length. So what I did was, once I had my inside measurement of 30 inches, and I knew that my tiles were 7 inches in height, what I did was I added 1 inch to the bottom and 1 inch to the top and 1 inch to the sides to create a frame. And in order to do that, I was able to buy very thin trim, which was 1 inch in width and about 1/8 of an inch thickness. So it's a very thin trim. And this trim is actually what I used to create a border not only all the way around my glass mirror tiles, but I also used it in between each of the glass tiles to mimic panes. So this really makes it look like a window pane. I spaced all my tiles out perfectly, and this is going to vary depending on the size of your door, etc. So I had 30 inches to work with. I took my measurement in the middle and then worked it out. So I placed one of my tiles directly in the middle of the board, and then I spaced things out from there. Now, in order to, because my boards or my little pieces of wood that are going in between each tile was 1 inch in width, I needed to make sure that that measurement was consistent, but I had a little bit extra left over on the sides. So what I had to do was improvise. I added my 1 inch little pieces to either end, but then I had to cut with an X-Acto knife a much thinner piece to add onto either side in order to make it flush and filled in the sides. I later came in and just used some wood filler, sanded it down, and was able to kind of camouflage it that way. Now also at this point, before you get too far ahead into your project, just make it a lot easier on yourself by pre-painting all your wood once you've cut it out and laid it out. Do not glue or adhere anything until everything is painted, because I can tell you that it is very difficult to paint the little tiny pieces of wood all the way around the glass without taking a lot of care. So I did my prime, I did 2 coats of whatever color that you're using. In my case, it's white. And at the very end, I came in and touched it up wherever it needed to be touched up. After I added a bit of wood filler and sanded it down, I was able to just dab in a little bit of the white and camouflage it that way. And with the frame, it came already primed, so I only had to give it 1 coat of paint, and at the very end I gave everything a final coat just to blend everything together. So now that you've got all your measurements with your pieces of wood, the next part is the topper. And the topper is the crown of the door, or the piece of board that is horizontal along the top of the doorway or your window. So in my case, I bought a 3-dimensional trim. It almost looks like crown molding, but the difference is it's made for a door, so it is finished off on either side, and they've cut that special angle to complete that piece of wood. Now, rather than going through a lot of heartache, all I did, because my crown piece or the top piece was 42 inches wide, I sat it on top of my 2 sideboards and determined how much of a little bit of an overlap I wanted on either side. And I thought 1/4 of an inch looked good, 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch door frame. I took the outside measurement, I added an extra 1/4 of an inch to either side, so that was another 1/2 inch, and that gave me my measurement. So I needed to reduce my 42-inch crown molding or door molding for the top down to about 36 inches. So what I did is I cut a piece out of the middle, because that piece I could cut directly flat and attach the 2 pieces together to give me my measurement without disturbing the ends, which were manufacturally finished and were perfect. So that was a good way to do that. I attached the 2 pieces just with some wood glue, let it sit overnight, added a little bit of wood filler, sanded down, and that I gave a final coat, as I did with the rest of the door. So now I have my crown piece, I've got my 2 side pieces, which I can now measure off at the top and cut those to size. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to adhere the 2 side pieces to the door. So exactly the way we did it to measure it out, I'm going to put it in place in this order. So I added the 2 side pieces and I secured them with finishing nails. Then I took my cross piece, which is sitting flush with the top of the door, the one that's 1.5 inches, and I secured that to the door with a few finishing nails. Then I took my hardy board, which I had pre-measured, and I laid all my tiles out. I also laid all my pieces of wood out, basically doing a dry run on this piece of hardy board. And once I had everything planned out, it all fit in place, I had all the wood painted, I then gently removed everything off the hardy board. It's a glue adhesive specifically for mirrors, so I used that to attach my mirrors in place, and I also used liquid nails in order to adhere the little pieces of wood onto the hardy board. So really it was gluing everything in place on top of the hardy board so that I could secure it to the wall. Now when I actually put everything together, there was enough of a trim around it, remember we've added the wooden trim, that I was able to I was able to nail right through the wood and the hardy board onto the wall. But what I actually did was I did secure the hardy board with the glued mirrors on it. I secured that to the wall with liquid nails first in order to glue it, and it is quite heavy once you add all of the glass onto your hardy board. So I used enough of the liquid nails on the hardy board. I sat it directly on top of my door using that little piece of crossbeam wood as a support to support it in place. I added it on, and then I added some nails or some screws to secure the board onto the wall until it was able to completely dry overnight, 24 hours. The following day, I was able to come in and place the top crowning piece on the top of the door, which I just used some nailing or a nail gun or small finishing nails to secure that to the outside. At that point, I painted everything up. I gave it a fresh coat of paint, and I just stood back and admired my work. And it was unbelievable how well that it really tricked the eye in making the room look so much bigger, because it elevated the eye upwards. The reflection of the light coming from outside on the mirror really made it look like it was that you could see through, that it was a glass. So the transom became very, very realistic, and my room looked so much bigger. Also another trick, and this was a very small entryway that I had to try and create the illusion that it was bigger than it was. So the doors were the first things that I did. I didn't want to do the same thing over the front door. It would have been too much glass or too much mirror. So what I did is I just created or duplicated a big, thick crown molding all across the top of the door, and that too gave the illusion that the door was much bigger than it actually was. And the final tip was in even making the room look even a little bit taller, I wanted to trim off the ceiling, but rather than putting my crown molding along the wall of the perimeter of the ceiling, I actually did and added my crown molding right to the ceiling as opposed to the wall, and that way it takes your eye right up to the ceiling as opposed to stopping at the bottom of the crown molding. So as you can see, this is the other side of the door with just a regular frame, and it's just an average size door, but it looks makes the room look short. So if we open the door and go to the other side, is the exterior door, and all I've done is just boxed in my door and topped it off because I've got two side lights, and this definitely creates the illusion of height. You can also see that I placed the crown molding along the ceiling, and this also helps to create that additional height. So I hope that you like this video. I hope that it inspires you. It's a very effective way and a very cost-effective way to make a room look much larger and much grander than it actually is. So when you enter the room, it seems to be much taller. That's the second door. but it makes the room appear much taller than it actually is. So if you liked this video and you found it informative, I hope that you share it. Happy woodworking!